Denise Roche.
Mr Chair, I rise to take a short call on this. Sir, I want to address the SOP that the supplementary order paper that my colleague Materia today has put forward. But before I do that, I just want to make a couple of general comments, and I think I'll start by saying that essentially what we've got in New Zealand is a housing stock of rental accommodation that is substandard. And how do we know that? We know that because there are, according to the Children's Commissioner, 42,000 hospital visits per year, with 15 children dying every year because of substandard housing, because of poor insulation. We know that because we have seen so many people who are desperate for housing, who are living in sheds, who are living in garages, who are living in caravans and even in cars. And I blame this government because they have not addressed the housing crisis, which has enabled bad landlords to continue to provide poor rental accommodation. And sir, it's about time we did something about it. The Minister said earlier that we do have regulations, but sir, they're being flouted. They're incredibly, there is so many different examples of people who are living in substandard housing where, if there are regulations, the landlords aren't meeting them anyway. And I have examples of that in my own community where I had some friends who essentially were renting a house that had, in the end, they basically couldn't turn the electricity on because the wiring was so poor, let alone heat the home in the middle of winter. And when they asked for that to be fixed, it just didn't happen. And so they moved out. But the landlord put that property on the market and another desperate family moved in with no repairs being undertaken whatsoever. Sir, I want to refer to some of the submissions that came through that support the measures that my colleague Materia today has in the SOP. And these were particularly from the Citizens Advice Bureau, who said that they have had a 40% increase in inquiries related to residential tenancies in the last 5 years. Now, sir, I believe that reflects the fact that there is a wide breach of minimum standards from landlords, and it's probably why they support more regulation for the protection of tenants. And sir, that's what we should be aiming at. We should be remembering that a home, when it is rented, is a home. It is not just a rental property, not just a way for the landlord to make money. And if we focus on that, then we should be focusing on the rights of tenants as well. So the right to warm, safe, dry, affordable housing is the first point, but the second point is around security of tenancy. And this, sir, is why we have in the bill a right of renewal for tenants of 3 years. Sir, I grew up in rental accommodation provided by the state through the railways. And about 10 years of my life, 10 or 11 years, was in one rental property. Now that enabled me to go to one school, to have one community that I was a part of, to be very, very stable. And we have seen through various reports the declining education outcomes from children who are shifting from house to house to house because their rental properties are not secure, who are having to move because they're facing rent increases, sir. And that's another reason why we want rights for tenants that include that any increases in the rent needs to be clarified before, needs to be part of the rental agreement at the beginning, and it has to be justified, so that we don't have families that are facing major rental increases and unable to budget and having to shift into cheaper accommodation and upsetting and interfering and interrupting the education of their children. When you move into a home, it is a home. And that means you are part of a community. That's where the schools are. That's where...
I call Chris